Baruch Spinoza was born in 1632 in Amsterdam, at a time when reason and faith were seen as irreconcilable opposites. His background was modest, the son of Portuguese Jewish immigrants who fled the Inquisition in search of refuge in the more liberal cities of Europe. But for Spinoza, refuge was far from the walls of the synagogue and the religious conventions that defined his people's lives. What would set him apart from everyone around him? A simple question. Spinoza began to question the religious dogmas that formed the basis of his community, which was considered heresy at the time. He challenged the idea of a personal God who would punish and reward, preferring a conception of God as something vast, boundless, a God present in the natural laws of the universe. For him, God was not a separate and distant entity, but rather the very substance that permeated everything that existed. This radical pantheism challenged not only Jewish orthodoxy, but all the religious traditions of his time. It was this deep questioning that led him to be excommunicated from his community. The decision to abandon his religious heritage was not taken lightly. Spinoza, who never sought fame or wealth, chose to live austerely, with extreme simplicity, dedicating his life to study and philosophical reflection. He lost friends, was ostracized, and became isolated, but he remained steadfast in his quest for truth. Spinoza could not conform to the traditional thinking that dominated the world. He saw philosophy as a means to achieve freedom of thought and intellectual autonomy, values that still resonate in contemporary society. In an era when reason was often subordinated to faith, he stood as a beacon of free thought. For Spinoza, true freedom was not just about being free from physical oppression, but about being able to think and act according to reason, free from the chains of superstition or religious authority. These ideas, which today are seen as progressive, were at the time considered revolutionary and dangerous. His defense of an ethics based on understanding the natural laws and the necessity of the universe where everything happened according to causes and effects without divine intervention or human moral judgment placed Spinoza at the center of controversy. He rejected the anthropocentric view of the world, where humanity was seen as the pinnacle of divine creation, and proposed instead a vision where nature and God were one and the same. For him, there was no personal creator, but a network of natural laws that operated independently of human will. The radical nature of his ideas could not be ignored. His contemporaries saw him as a dangerous thinker, someone who undermined the religious and political foundations that supported the order of the time. His books were banned, his ideas marginalized, and he, in turn, continued in silence, writing only for himself or for a small circle of followers. However, despite the marginalization of his ideas at the time, something extraordinary happened in the decades that followed. The seeds of Spinoza began to germinate in the minds of later thinkers, those who sought a more rational and scientific explanation of the world. One of these thinkers, much later, would become one of the greatest geniuses in history, Albert Einstein. What could have led Einstein, a physicist who transformed the understanding of nature in unimaginable ways, to become an unconditional admirer of Spinoza? How could the ideas of a 17th century philosopher resonate with someone who lived in a world of scientific discoveries and revolutionary theories in the 20th century? This seemingly unlikely connection leads us to reflect on the lasting impact of Spinoza and how his views on nature, science, and freedom of thought intertwined with Einstein's discoveries. The ideas of Baruch Spinoza, although initially rejected by many of his contemporaries, had a profound and lasting impact on the history of thought. His philosophy, which challenged the religious and political conventions of the time, was not limited to his era, but extended across centuries, influencing key Enlightenment thinkers and shaping, almost invisibly, the course of modern science. The radical nature of his propositions about God, nature, and human freedom would echo for centuries, meeting with the great minds of philosophy and even physics. At the heart of his philosophy was the idea that God is not a personal being or a separate entity, but the very substance that constitutes everything that exists. For Spinoza, God did not create the world and then distance himself. He was immanent in the universe, identified with the natural laws that govern everything that occurs. This pantheistic view, in which God and nature are inseparable, became one of the cornerstones of his thought, challenging religious tradition and asserting that the pursuit of understanding the world was, ultimately, a pursuit to comprehend God himself. This understanding of God as the totality of the universe had an unexpected resonance in the 20th century when it met the thinking of Albert Einstein. Although Einstein was not religious in the conventional sense, he shared with Spinoza the conception of a non-personal God, one that was present in the laws of the cosmos. Einstein often expressed a view of God as the order in the universe, a perspective that was in complete harmony with Spinoza's thinking. For him, as for Spinoza, the universe was not governed by divine whims or miracles, but by mathematical and logical laws which could be unraveled through human reason. This connection between Spinoza's philosophy and Einstein's physics was not merely philosophical. It was also deeply embedded in the understanding of nature and determinism. Spinoza believed that everything in the universe, including human actions, was subject to a set of inescapable causes and effects. He rejected the idea of free will as an illusion, arguing that human choices were not truly free, but determined by prior causes, many of which were beyond the individual's control. For Spinoza, what we call freedom was, in fact, the understanding of these causes and the adaptation to the natural laws that govern the world. Thus, freedom was not something related to arbitrary choice, but to the capacity to act in accordance with reason and universal laws, accepting the necessity that shapes all events. This deterministic viewpoint had a huge influence on the philosophical debates that followed, especially during the Enlightenment, when reason and science began to gain ground over religious and mystical beliefs. Philosophers such as John Locke, Immanuel Kant, and later Friedrich Nietzsche engaged with Spinoza's ideas, either in search of a rational ethics or in discussions about the nature of human freedom and the role of reason in constructing morality. In physics, Spinoza's determinism would resonate in fascinating ways with the theories that emerged centuries later. Spinoza's view of a universe governed by an infinite chain of causes and effects seemed to align with classical physics, particularly with Newtonian mechanics, where all interactions between celestial bodies and particles were determined by precise laws. However, modern physics, especially quantum mechanics, would eventually question the idea of a completely determined universe. Nonetheless, Spinoza's legacy, with its emphasis on the search for universal order, still influences how scientists think about the cosmos as a totality that, despite its mysteries, is governed by an intrinsic logic. Einstein, for example, shared the view that the universe was, in some way, organized in a rational and comprehensible manner. His famous phrase, "God does not play dice," expressed his belief in the order and determinability of the cosmos, which led him to oppose the probabilistic interpretations of quantum physics. His search for a unified theory of the fundamental forces of the universe, a theory that would explain everything in terms of a single logical structure, was, in a way, a continuation of Spinoza's view that the universe could be understood through rational and interconnected laws. Spinoza's view of determinism also deeply influenced the debate on human freedom, a question that remains a central theme in contemporary philosophy. If everything we do is determined by previous causes, what is the role of moral responsibility? How can we be responsible for our actions if they are not truly free? These dilemmas continue to be one of the great philosophical issues of today. Spinoza's idea that freedom is the understanding of the causes that govern us offers a provocative answer. True freedom does not lie in the ability to choose without restrictions, but in the capacity to understand and act according to the laws of nature and reason. This view of the human being as part of a mechanical and determined universe, where everything follows a chain of causes and effects, does not diminish the importance of human action. On the contrary, it places it in a deeper context. Human choices, though not free in the absolute sense, can be freer to the extent that we understand the mechanisms that govern our lives. Instead of resisting a universe without laws, Spinoza invited us to integrate into it, to find our freedom not in breaking the laws, but in understanding and accepting them. Baruch Spinoza lived his life immersed in a silent yet profound conflict between his radical philosophical vision and the world around him, which was not ready to accept his revolutionary ideas. His excommunication from the Jewish community was just the first of many challenges he would face while trying to live according to the principles he defended. Spinoza not only questioned the religious beliefs of his time, but was also bold enough to challenge the power structures that upheld those beliefs. His refusal to accept the authority of organized religion, his pantheistic view of God, and his rejection of free will made him an isolated and marginalized figure. Living according to his principles was not easy. Spinoza faced a constant internal struggle as he balanced his desire to follow reason with his need to connect with other human beings. By distancing himself from social and religious conventions, he found himself alone, without the support of a community, living in a city that rejected him. This solitude was not just physical but intellectual as well, as his quest for truth pushed him to be a radical thinker, whose ideas were far ahead of his time. However, instead of yielding to external pressure, Spinoza maintained his intellectual independence. He knew how to step away from the shadows of social convention, accepting his condition as a solitary thinker, but remaining faithful to his vision of a world governed by reason and the understanding of natural laws. In his relentless pursuit of truth, Spinoza did not turn away from everyday life. To support himself, he worked as a lens grinder, a modest profession that allowed him the freedom to pursue his philosophical reflection without the constraints of a conventional job. The artisanal work of grinding lenses, though simple and seemingly distant from the great philosophical questions, was, in some ways, a reflection of his own meticulous and detailed approach to philosophy. Spinoza saw his work as an expression of his own search for clarity, perfection, and understanding of the world. He found satisfaction in his intellectual development, staying true to his principles, even if it meant marginalization and isolation. This isolation, however, was not in vain. The depth of his thought and his courage in challenging religious and political conventions were not recognized by his contemporaries, but over time, his influence expanded and became undeniable. Spinoza's legacy, which had been ignored or even hostilely rejected during his life, began to flourish in the 18th century, especially during the Enlightenment, when his ideas on reason, freedom, and human nature began to be seen in a new light. Thinkers like Voltaire, Leibniz, and Hume encountered his works and recognized the value of his philosophical contributions. The peak of recognition for Spinoza's legacy came in the 20th century, when Albert Einstein, one of the greatest scientists in history, became a deep admirer of the philosopher. Einstein saw in Spinoza a mind of extraordinary clarity, one that had understood the laws of the universe in a way that resonated with his own search for a unified theory. Einstein's relationship with Spinoza's philosophy was not only intellectual, but also spiritual. The scientist, who also rejected a personal God, found in Spinoza a philosophy that explained the universe in a way he believed to be true as an interconnected whole, governed by natural laws. Thus, Spinoza's legacy is of a depth that spans centuries, transcends the boundaries of philosophy, and even influences modern science. Spinoza's view that the universe is governed by immutable laws and that true human freedom lies in understanding those laws strongly resonated with the developments of modern physics. But his contribution was not limited to science. He challenged the morality, religion, and politics of his time, proposing a world in which rational understanding could replace the superstitions and dogmatic beliefs that imprisoned human thought. What can we learn from Spinoza, especially in a world still immersed in debates on freedom, reason, and the nature of the universe? The answer may lie in his relentless pursuit of truth, even in the face of a society that was not ready to listen. Spinoza teaches us that true freedom is not the ability to choose arbitrarily, but the ability to understand the laws that govern the world and act in accordance with them. He shows us that, in a world full of dogmas and restrictions, true courage is living according to our principles, even when this places us in conflict with what is conventional. In an era when political and religious divisions still dominate debates, Spinoza's ideas offer a refreshing perspective: the pursuit of truth, the rejection of superstition, and confidence in the capabilities of human reason. The philosopher challenges us to look at the world more broadly, to recognize the interconnectedness of all that exists, and to find our freedom not in resisting the laws of nature, but in understanding them and living according to them. Spinoza's legacy, although ignored in his time, became a foundation upon which many of the ideas that shape our understanding of the world today were built. He remains, even today, a beacon of radical and liberating thought, inviting us to question, to learn, and above all, to pursue the truth with courage and without compromise. By reflecting on his life and ideas, we are called to reflect on our own search for truth and how much we are willing to sacrifice to live authentically according to it.